Thank you very much for having me. That's my disclosure, but I'll try to be objective. I want to talk about lumbar endoscopic spine surgery, which I call LESS, L-E-S-S, which you have to admit is a very, very cool name for a minimally invasive procedure. But it's essentially the oldest state-of-the-art procedure that I have in my arsenal because it started in 1999. That's 30 years ago. And since then, we've had lots and lots of work on that. And I'll give you an example. If you just go to PubMed and just type in endoscopic discectomy, you get a fair number of studies. In fact, it's about the same as what you get for microdiscectomy, which is one of the best procedures that we do in spine, arguably. And it's also the procedure that we compete with. So the question of does endoscopy work, I don't think that question needs any more work because I think the answer is yes. I think the more important question is, if it's so great, why such the poor adoption? Because I bet you it's still a minority of spine surgeons in this room. And I think there's two reasons. The first, the learning curve. And anyone that says the learning curve is not difficult, they basically started surfing, playing golf, and playing the guitar in one lesson. The rest of us, those are very difficult things to learn. And I talk about this all the time, but that's not what they asked me to talk about today. The other reason, which is substantial, is the reimbursement issue. And I typically avoid this because it tends to trigger me. So if I trigger anybody else, I'll be in the back at the end, and I have lots of extra Paxil that you can use, okay? So I think this problem starts out with the crazy world we live in the US as it pertains to how we code things and how we get reimbursed, because it's this weird centralized all-knowing power that we have no control over. And in 2012, they made a decision, and there's lots of reasons for it, but the decision was made to make sure that something like 63030, when we're doing a discectomy surgery endoscopically, or even 63047, a decompression for stenosis that can be done open, mini-open, or endoscopically, that if it's done endoscopically, when everything else is the same, it should not be billed under 63030 or 63047, okay? Instead, it defaulted to 62287, which is a percutaneous nucleotomy, which is a totally different procedure for people that don't know what the hell's going on. But that's life. The sun sets in the, rises in the east and sets in the west. 2012, that happened. So in 2012, guess what happened to my practice? It went way down. So eventually they decided that in 2017, that's 5 years later, to create a new code for it, 62380. And specifically, it was included with a bunch of other things like the MAL procedure, topic of a separate discussion. But when you put that in there, now it's a code that clearly identifies that you're doing the surgery endoscopically. So guess what happened? It made it even more difficult to do the surgery and get paid. And now you specifically, clearly, absolutely, without question, are not supposed to use 63030 and 63047. And not only that, it doesn't take into account, what if you do 2 levels? What if you do something more complicated? What if you do it in the cervical and thoracic spine? There's no code associated with it. So this code is all messed up. And you thought that was bad? The last thing is that even though they approved it, there's still no valuation for it. There's some RVUs, but Medicare, for example, on the table of how much you should get paid for that procedure, it's blank. So what should we do? I wish I had an answer for you. This is a topic of a very long discussion. And we only have 6 minutes, so luckily I don't have to go about that, but I think if there's one thing that we should all go behind is that the 62380 code is so flawed that if there's one thing we should all rally behind, it's to retract that code. That will help because at least we can go back and do surgery appropriately, goal-oriented, and code for the procedure that makes the most sense. So if you're doing a microdiscectomy endoscopically, you code 63030 because it's the same thing. We're just using a slightly different technique. And same thing with 63047. So you can see we have a lot of work to do. And with that, and with the interest of time, I'd like to thank you. But if you're bored and want to see more surgery like this, because I felt very inadequate that I didn't have any of my videos up there, please go to my YouTube channel, and you can see a bunch of surgeries that I do start to finish. And then a plug for the importance of addressing the learning curve, because it's not enough to say the learning curve is difficult. We must ask, what about it is difficult, and what can we do to fix it? And that's really my interest, but if anyone wants to talk about that or the coding issues, I'll stick around and be happy to give you my thoughts. So thank you very, very, very much for letting me be here.